Cape and Cowl by Artimae and Postscript. Chapter 7. 1. July 16th, 1007. Things have gone far better than expected. I was afraid I'd lost my chance at Facade after the guard captured him, but one lieutenant just happened to bring him to me. It was enthralling, making him squirm. I made sure he yelled nice and loud for the guard to hear everything. If I'm correct, that guard will tell his superior everything he heard. I gave him the crude map Facade had drawn up as well. Now I just have to wait until the guards move against Bloodshot. I'll be right behind them, waiting for my own chance to strike. Bloodshot caught me by surprise. Now it's my turn. I'll be prepared this time. Snowstorm. 2. Gentle colts, Captain Gildedleaf began, offering Lieutenant Ayla a perfunctory nod. Lady? A large map of Manhattan was splayed on the wall for all of the lieutenants in the room to see. Several red circles had been drawn on it, each individual one contributing to an even larger, slightly oblong oval shape. The lieutenants of the guard, both of day and night shifts, stared intently at it. Memorized it. It had been a long time indeed since their good captain had called a convention of this magnitude, and they were all ready to prove their worth. A crisis threatens our city, the captain said, drawing everyone's attention to him. Ironic. I was never one for speeches, yet here I am giving one. And its name is Bloodshot. A low murmur rippled through the lieutenants like a wave. They all knew the name. It had become almost legendary. I don't have to remind any of you what happened 4 years ago. It took over half the guard in this city to bring that beast down, and he took a good number of us in return. Ayla's eyes lowered until she stared at the floor between her front feet, vividly recalling the entire squadron she had commanded and lost to that crazed stallion. It was a night she had never fully forgiven the captain for. He had dragged her away as she was screaming unladylike obscenities and trying desperately to send a crossbow bolt straight between Bloodshot's eyes. It had taken almost a year of counseling under Mindmender to get her fit for duty again, and she'd had the very same reaction only a day ago. A year of therapy, of getting over it, down the drain in one night. He is, once again, a major crisis. He did not escape the asylum that he was sent to. No, he was let out. I am confirming what many of you have already suspected. In his infinite power and significantly less foresightedness, the Red Hoof ordered the release of his favorite rabid pet. He did so in an attempt to destroy the newest element in this city, the mare-do-well. Noises barely above whispers wafted over the room. By now, they had all heard of her little exploits. Some of them in that very room, including Lieutenants Flint and Ayla, had seen her standing toe-to-toe with Bloodshot only a few days ago. Everyone else had heard it secondhand, and some even disbelieved. No pony in Manhattan could match him. No pony. She has become a phantom thorn in his side. I only say phantom because, as far as I'm aware, she barely acknowledges his very existence. Yet his need to control every aspect of this city, or else destroy that which he cannot control, compels him to take the most drastic of measures. But we are not here to discuss one lunatic's obsessive-compulsive traits. We are here because he was blinded by the fear of the unknown and sought to unleash hell itself on this fair city for one costumed mayor who doesn't follow by his rules. We are here because Bloodshot must be stopped. Captain Leaf levitated a small stick up to the map, tapping the center of each circled area in turn. It was told to me on good authority that these are potential safe houses where he might be staying. That is, unfortunately, all we have to work with. There's never been any apparent pattern as to when and where he moves next, but we will raid them all the same. We have another advantage, Leaf continued. This hadn't been so hard after all. He almost liked talking in this manner. It was empowering. Namely the fact that, believe it or not, Bloodshot is wounded. Several bolts were lodged into him, and even better, the mare-do-well broke his jaw. They all blinked at that, their faces denoting their surprise, even as they remained professionally quiet. Yes, lieutenants, she actually managed to hurt him, which is why we must use her to our advantage. As of this moment, the bounty on her head is off. He looked around, eyeing in particular those guards which he knew were nothing more than Redhoof's own puppets. I take it no one has a problem with that? She's no longer our enemy. From now on, she's our ally, and she will be treated as such. What of the rumors that we made a temporary treaty with the Redhoof over bringing down this monster? One of the younger lieutenants called out from the back. He killed my brother! Similar cries and murmurs of agreement could be heard in the cozy meeting room. We're done with the Redhoof, Captain Leaf said flatly. This time, there was no professional silence. Sharp gasps could be heard throughout the room. We're done with letting him romp around our city. It's time we became guards again. After we're done with his rabid pet, we go after him. One of the braver stallions in the pocket of the Redhoof stepped forward. You do know what this would mean for many of us, Captain? He asked cautiously. Of course I do. I have a daughter at stake here, and I'm tired of that hanging over my head, over her head, like a dark cloud. For the first time, we have the upper hoof. But this isn't about the Redhoof. This is about Bloodshot. These safe houses, he tapped the red circles again, are where he's holed up, and wounded. Now it's our job to find him, and quick. I would much prefer to take our time, send Pegasi to scout and all that, but there's little time. I reiterate, he is a crisis, and he must be stopped immediately. Now for the plan. Gilded Leaf's mouth was a thin line as he concentrated. The funny part was, he didn't have much of a plan at all, not one that didn't involve a lot of luck. A pair of lieutenants will lead a squad of 8 regulars to each safe house. You may take them down by whatever force necessary. If a crossbow bolt happens to go into his face, I won't shed a tear. That does not mean, however, that you can play hero in all this. When you find him, fire a flare, and the rest of us will come. Along with the mare-do-well, I hope. Sir, I've been here for 13 years, and I will assist you with this mission. But afterwards, I'll have to resign. You're asking us to pick a side, and if I turn my back on you, I'll have disgraced the guard. But if I turn my back on him, I'll die, the lieutenant said. Several others discreetly nodded in response. A shame, Leaf said in response. I've known many guards who started off as his puppets and decided to treat this position seriously. I've also known many who've had opposite fates. Leave if you wish. I'll hold nothing against you. But don't believe for a second that I won't bring you down with him myself. Of course, the stallion said. Not that it mattered. He would likely be killed for having exposed his identity to the guard. At this point, there was nothing left to lose. I hope Bloodshot finds me out there, he muttered as the meeting finished. It'll be a hell of a lot quicker than what the boss will do. Now then, Leaf said, deciding to ignore his belly-aching lieutenant. They'll be dealt with later themselves. If we're done with talks of future mutiny, we have a few more details to work out. So, what's the big plan? Peleus asked Flint, catching up to the ladder as the guard lieutenants all filed out of their rarely used strategic room, their heads low with reined-in worry and brows furrowed deeply in contemplation. Even Flint himself wore an air of somberness, almost shrouding himself in it like a cloak on a drizzly day. The big plan doesn't concern you, Flint replied, a certain steel edge in his voice. You and the other cadets are to follow normal patrols, in pairs. But, before Peleus could get in another word of protest, Flint whirled around with such harsh quickness as to make the cadet recoil, his face hard and angry. But nothing! This is far too dangerous for you. Sir, we're not fools here. If you're not a fool, then stop acting like one and accept your duties, Flint snapped. He had enough on his plate now without worrying about keeping the younger guards, especially the one he'd actually grown attached to, safe. Or, worse yet, have one of them get too gung-ho and try to play the hero. Speaking of the hero, the weary lieutenant mused. As he watched Peleus storm off to get a new patrol route, Flint's thoughts turned outward as he absent-mindedly rejoined his comrades, wondering what part the mare-do-well will have in all this. Very little, he silently hoped, for she was even younger than most of the cadets being forced away. Maybe she could hold her own better, sure, but still, so damned young. As he glanced out of a window into a gray, early morning sky, he knew deep down that he hoped for too much. 3. Snowstorm lay on her back atop a building, staring aimlessly up at the newly dawned gray sky. The mask of her mare-do-well costume sat limply beside her, expressionless and harmless without a head to fill it. High above, thick clouds full of a day's worth of rain drifted listlessly by, prepared on the previous night by Manhattan's own weather Pegasi. Why is it, what was once her voice echoed in her mind, that it's always raining on a climactic day? The thought made her smile. Being the city's hero was nothing like her old collection of Power Ponies comics said. No maniac for her to foil, or super friends with superpowers to back her up. But at least there was the rain on the big day. The day when everything came to a head, for good or ill. Her stomach clenched. That was another thing which separated fantasy from reality. The Power Ponies could always count on winning the day. Even the ambitious and overly reckless Daring Do got her way. In the end, it was easy enough for A.K. Yearling to write out a happy ending for her favorite protagonist with just a few simple words. Snowstorm wished she had that same luxury. She yawned, fighting against heavy eyelids. How long had it been since she had a restful sleep? Not since she had come back home, really. Every night had been restless, herself sleeping only out of necessity, and then that creature that had ambushed her had rattled her cage significantly. She'd returned to Manhattan, sure as any arrogant youth that she was untouchable with her superior martial arts. She had never even considered that there could be anyone else to match her, let alone best her with stupid brute force and a hide of steel. Some twisted part of her was thankful for Bloodshot, though. He was the monster she'd had 5 years' worth of nightmares about, that more than anything had thrown her off guard. She came home expecting monsters, mindless beasts, and instead she met Boltbuck. The fact that not only could one of them ever have any ounce of remorse, but even be willing to help her as repentance hadn't crossed her single-tracked mind, also, in a way, caught her off guard. And so she had gone out, slightly calmer, expecting to find the others like him, a sniveling little coward who would throw themselves at her feet for forgiveness. And instead, she found Bloodshot. A not unpleasant shiver ran down her spine at the thought of going up against him again, fully prepared this time. She could revel in a fight, holding nothing back. Not only could that monstrous stallion take it, but he fully deserved it as far as she was concerned. Her thoughts drifted with the clouds, turning towards a return home. She brought her front hooves up to her eyes, staring at them and the purple boots on them. What was she even going to do after this whole mess was done and over? There was still the fourth, Roughhouser, his name was. But he'd probably skipped town by now, off in Baltimore or Chicago. If he was smart, that was. She snorted in amusement. Sitting behind that relaxing orange cart had many advantages, and gossip was one of them. Ponies up and down Market Street were talking and talking and talking about the mare-do-well, about what she meant to and for the city. What would happen if I told them all it's just a ruse? A ruse. That's what it amounted to. A veiled disguise to eke out revenge. Nothing more. But it could be more. His voice. Frost storms. She heard it quite frequently. Would probably hear it her entire life. But it had a point, she conceded as she stared at those booted hooves. The mare-do-well could be so much more for this city. But who was she to decide that? She could go on to live a normal life after this. She still had her family, adopted though they may be. She still had a friend, somehow. She could be normal. Happy. Maybe it isn't that simple, though. I mean, you've enjoyed it, too. The thrill of the fight, the adoration. It's okay to admit that there's been some fun times. And you've made me proud. Anyway, whether you choose to keep this up or not, you've more than avenged me in my book, sis. The thrill of the fight. The words were frightening in their truth. Something caught her ear, causing it to twitch. She rolled onto her feet and slid the mask down over her face, following the source of the noise. No, noises. The clank of metal mixed unharmoniously with the marching of dozens of sets of hooves. So that older Fulaki, she thought his name might be Flint, had kept his word after all. He'd gone to his captain. The captain had formulated some sort of plan, and now they were on the march. Good. She saw a mix of all pony races as they moved in packs, like trained wolves. She counted 10, 2 in armor more ornate than others, obviously higher-ups. This wasn't exactly what she had been waiting for, though she was admittedly surprised it had happened so quickly. Now they could flush Bloodshot out, and lead her straight to him. She frowned beneath the mask, upset mostly with herself for admitting she needed help in the first place. But she was one mare against a dozen possible locations. Just because one safe house would be empty wouldn't mean it would stay that way long after she'd gone to another, putting her in a possibly endless loop. Instead, the guard and their vastly superior abundance of resources would bring him out for her. Their crossbows didn't hurt either. She shivered. This time, it was cold, like an icicle tickling her spine. As much as she was excited to face an opponent that could match her, she had to swallow her pride and admit to needing help against him. It'd be stupid and arrogant to think he couldn't put her on the defensive again, or worse. But that would come later. For now, all she had to do was wait. There would be some sort of signal when he was found, she was sure. She lay back down, removed her mask once again for the fresh air, and waited. 4. Lieutenant Ayla, I know it's none of my business, but what are your personal stakes in this? Pelias asked as they flew through the city together. I mean, Captain Leaf gave you specific instructions to not go after Bloodshot. Because I want him dead, she said casually, as if giving the time. Forgive me, Lieutenant, but that's not good enough. There's got to be something more. What happened between you and that monster? All I've heard are rumors, but there's 100 of them. Please, tell me what really happened. You really don't want to know that, Pel. All right, you tell me the story, and I'll tell you my most embarrassing secret, Pelias said, unsure whether he should grin or not. I already figured out you were Colt Cutler, she replied, shooting him a wink. I'm afraid of the dark, he said, ignoring the jab. Ayla cocked an eyebrow, her face an expression of mild surprise. For a Fulake, the dark was their home, a place of comfort. Pelias blushed, hoping her story would at least have made it worthwhile. You must have had a rough foalhood then, she instead remarked, trying her best to avoid the cadet's badgering. It ought to work. Kids like him love talking about themselves. Spent most of it at the orphanage, he said. I tried to fit in by changing my sleep patterns. After a while, I could just sort of live a normal life. Not that it did much good. Just meant I got to be awake at the same time as the bullies. And when I tried to sleep during the day again, it felt wrong. And the night just started feeling weird to me. I started to get why ponies are afraid of it. But anyway, I've told you my big secret. Can't you at least give me the short version of yours? Kid, you don't want to hear it. I've heard the rumors. Some of them are nastier than he killed your squad. Some say he was an old friend of yours who went nuts. Others say he killed your family. All piles of Pegasus shit. All of it. Ayla snapped harshly, sticking her lower lip out in a furious pout. I didn't know him till 4 years ago when we brought him down. When he tore through my squad like they were paper. Kids barely older than you, thinking they'd be all honorable guards and romantic horse crap like that. He killed them all? But how did you... Pelias said before turning to see she was in tears. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed you to tell me this. When we find this guy, and we will find him, I'll make sure you get the final blow. How did I? I followed orders, that's how. I listened to the captain and didn't stupidly charge in. But after it happened, I wanted to. But Leaf had me dragged off, literally dragged away. I was cursing and spitting vials of hatred and venom. I told Leaf to shove that stick farther up his own ass so he'd get comfortable. I even threw in a few hexes my grandmother had taught me. Lots of ponies thought she dabbled in black magic. I wonder what sort of dark arts could create a monster like that. I have a bad feeling, Ayla, that if we don't hurry, we won't get through this without casualties. Reality check, kid. We're not heroes. The world doesn't revolve around us. Every lieutenant you can think of is out there now with Leaf himself, and your mare-do-well friend. If we find them, you'd just do something stupid, and I'd do something stupider and crazy. I wish Flint was here. Stupid and crazy are his specialty. Anyway, we need to find the mare-do-well. I think she has a plan, and if we know it, we can coordinate some sort of attack. Or we'd just get in her way. She strikes me as the type to work alone. Normally she would, but even she realizes what we're up against. Maybe we could grab a couple crossbows from the barracks. I know Leaf wants him taken alive, but confidentially, I don't care. He's no captain of mine, the coward. That's exactly the attitude they had. Believe it or not, the captain generally knows what's best. He's captain for a reason, Pel. I hear he's allowing the Red Hoof to help find his mad dog. You want that bastard and his goons to find him first? That won't be justice. That won't be the guard avenging their own. That'll just be another gang murder. If I can make even one difference tonight, I want it to be that the Red Hoof doesn't get to him first. Everything else is secondary. What about you? Ayla glanced sideways at the cadet, frowning. Pretty speech, but as usual, you're wrong. Leaf cast off the Red Hoof tonight. Half the lieutenants in the war room were practically squirming at his blasphemy. The Red Hoof has nothing to do with tonight. Probably doesn't even know what's going on. What? Peleus gasped. After a few moments, he regained his composure. A little late for him to start showing some backbone. And he couldn't have picked a worse time either. Half the guards were in his pocket. Now we'll be going into this fight at a disadvantage. I want to have a word with him once we're done. If I don't like how tonight goes, I might even throw in my badge. There's too much corruption on this force, Ayla, even without the Red Hoof's lackeys in our uniforms. Why, of course, Your Majesty, Ayla spat out sarcastically, sneering at Peleus's frustration. You are, of course, the singular hero who can pull this entire guard up and out of their corrupt slump. Talk of backbone is pretty, until it's your kid that's threatened. How did you hear about that? The captain told me that information was classified. He's so protective of his daughter that nearly none of the guards know he has one. Peleus eyed her suspiciously. Kid, when you're one of the few active mares in the guard, you become everyone's friend and confidant. Even the captain's. I'm practically mom to the entire force. With me in an amber bottle, he's told me things that make our hired psychiatrist's head spin. Really now, I guess I'll have to come to you the next time. Help! A voice from a few blocks west of their position cried desperately. Great. Peleus sighed before rushing off after the scream, with Ayla in tow. 5. The gray, gloomy skies opened for a light drizzle as Captain Gildedleaf reached his designated safe house, with his own contingent of guards in tow. It was a nondescript apartment complex, just as Facade had described it to Lieutenant Flint, who in turn described it to Captain Leaf himself. Nothing fancy, just a place any old pony could rent and live comfortably. Fancy wasn't the Red Hoof. Fancy drew attention. Sir, allow me to go first, the lieutenant accompanying Captain Leaf said. You're too valuable to lose in case of a trap. No pony in the guard is more valuable than anyone else, Leaf responded, admonishing his partner. The squad behind them shuffled their feet, eager and impatient to get the day going. The crossbows hanging at their sides were a foreign but very welcome weight. He could see in their faces the excitement at the possibility of getting to use one in a real scenario, and felt something between pity and disgust. It was a look Ayla would have recognized. Sir, may I go ahead? One of the guard asked the captain. I know this place. My grandmother lives here. I want to make sure she's all right, he said nervously. It was a sentiment shared by many of the other ponies there. These safe houses weren't secluded away from the rest of the world, but simple apartments, space shared with other residents, and more than a few of the guard had friends and family living there. No, the captain said flatly. Once we've secured this area, one way or another, we can check in on any family members. There was a brief murmur of disquiet at this amongst the group, but it was soon silenced by a look from the captain. As they walked slowly through the halls, the place seemed eerily quiet. The sound of a dog suddenly barking outside made one of the newer guard jump and put the rest on edge. Only the captain remained completely calm. May I help you? An elderly resident said sweetly from her doorway. It's rare to see Fulaki up this late. Or should I say this early? She chuckled. No, ma'am, Captain Leaf said, not bothering to look at her. Official business. I'd recommend you lock your door. Are you looking for Bloodshot? He came by for some cookies before. He was looking rather hurt, poor dear. I bandaged him up as best I could, but he needed more help than a little old pony like me could give. I hope he reached the hospital in time. He does so love my raisin cookies, she mused to herself. Gilded Leaf stopped suddenly enough to force the line of ponies behind him to run into each other. He turned to the dam, squinting with some combination of curiosity and contempt. You know him? Of course. I met him about 5 years ago. He had taken some sort of drug and was convulsing outside my apartment, so I ran him a cold bath and gave him some soup. He's the sweetest, dearest thing, but he's rather unstable as well. I heard he got some help a few years ago, and I visited him every week or so. I'm surprised they let him out so early, though. He always seemed like he could really hurt some pony with that temper of his if he let it. Gilded Leaf glanced over at his lieutenant, who looked as baffled as the captain felt. Where is he now? He wouldn't say, but... Oh, she began to sob. I think he's killed someone. There was blood on his hooves when I opened the door. Oh, my dear Bloodshot. How could you possibly harbor some pony like that? One of the guards piped up, drawing the ire of his captain. Oh, some pony like what, my dear? She asked sweetly. Was he a criminal? He always seemed so sweet to me. No, he wasn't, the captain lied quickly. But we need to find him as quickly as possible. Your suspicions about him being dangerous were correct. We believe he could be a danger to himself and others, so any information you might have would be greatly appreciated. After a few moments of contemplation, the old dame thought of something. Oh, there is one place he likes to go when he's upset, a nearby playground. He tells me he's been going there since he was a colt. Playground? Sir, if there's kids nearby and he goes nuts. One of the guard whispered to the captain. In today's rain, I doubt it, but we can't be too careful. Oh, please make sure he gets the help he needs, the old mare said as they turned to leave. We will, Captain Leaf replied, walking away with his guards. We will. Flint groaned. Not only was he out looking for some crazed stallion who could possibly break them all if he had the mind to, but he was doing it with Murdoch. Of all the lieutenants to get stuck with, it had to be him. No, of course Ayla had to be the crazy one, he thought sourly, trying his best to keep his face straight. It wouldn't do good for any of the lowers to see a lieutenant acting like a fool. Maybe I should have gotten a little nuts too. Get myself out of this assignment. Well, I'm not afraid of this guy, one of the guards said arrogantly. We're 10 ponies with crossbows. He's 1, unarmed. We see him, we shoot him, we go home. End of story. Life is never that simple, Flint said, taking a peek at his partner. Murdoch, usually opinionated to the point of bordering on bigoted, was unusually quiet. Ayla was crying before, he said at last. She was the one Fulake he treated like a friend, though that was hardly surprising with her being the most popular source of advice in the guard. I don't ever want to see her cry again. Listen, all of you, he said, turning to the others. Killing another pony is against the laws of Manhattan and the rules of the guard. But this Bloodshot is not a pony. He is a monster, and should he fall to your bolts, I will hold none responsible. Yes, sir, they responded in unison. Flint, I owe you an apology, he said quietly as they marched onwards towards the apartments. I've never really been a fan of your kind. Frankly, I see your average Fulake as shifty, lazy, and untrustworthy. But the captain trusts you with all his life, and so should I. I'll never command any respect if half the guard are shooting daggers at me whenever I'm not looking. Come on, Murdoch, don't get all mushy on me. I thought you hated everyone equally. He grinned slightly. I suppose I'm getting sentimental because we're all being sent into the meat grinder. These fools think a few bolts will stop him, but so did they all those years ago. I'm a little worried we may lose a few tonight. And, Fulake or not, a guard is a guard, and any such loss would be a tragedy. Flint shrugged. Maybe we'll get lucky and he's not here. Then we can just relax and wait for the signal. Relax? Murdoch laughed coldly. You think any of us would be able to relax tonight? Best case scenario is he only kills a few of us. No. Best case scenario is mare-do-well helps us out. Strange that she hasn't appeared yet. Are you certain she's still alive? What reason would she have to appear if she wasn't sure where Bloodshot was hiding? To check up on us? Or to use us as bait? Murdoch said darkly. You think she's that crafty? It's not as if we don't share a common goal here. For all we know, this could be some elaborate plan by the Red Hoof. We're at our most vulnerable here. Who's to say she's not working for him? I hear his second-in-command is a brilliant strategist. Red Hoof already has the city in his hooves. What more could he want? He could be mayor at any time and he knows it. Maybe you're right. You, over there, Murdoch said angrily to one of the others who had wandered off from the group. Just what the hell do you think you're doing? We ought to move as a group. But, sir, a flare just went up. You heard him. A flare has been spotted. I'll take point, and if something should happen to me, you are to follow Flint's orders without question. Is that understood? Yes, sir. 6. Come on, sis, you're gonna miss the best part. Snowstorm ran through the streets, too small to see the celebrations over the heads of the adults gathered in front of her. The sounds of various instruments floated down the city's paths, and it was joined by the chorus of 1,000 voices chatting busily. Froststorm turned to her sister, smiling. Need a boost? You're still a bit too small to see the fire dancers from there, he teased. Yes, please, the tiny filly said, standing up on her hind legs for her brother to pick her up easier. Froststorm carefully lifted her above the crowd, who stood in awe at the incredible display in front of them. 3 ponies twisted staves in their mouths that were on fire at each end, and the sight of the flames in the jet black of the night was hypnotic. After a while, the two continued along, not bothering with the rest of the fire juggling act. It was just another hour of the same thing over and over anyways. Where do you want to go next? The fortune teller? Maybe go grab a snack. I won't tell Mom if you won't. He grinned. Mrs. Orange had kept them on a strict diet for a few months now. We're not going to miss the fireworks, are we? Of course not. But we've got a little time before then, so we might as well enjoy it, he said, grinning from ear to ear. The two stopped at the tent of the fortune teller, an old unicorn who seemed lost in thought, or was perhaps simply half asleep. Froststorm coughed to get her attention. How much would our fortunes cost? He asked. The mayor looked him over as if sizing him up, before turning to the filly. Hers is free. Yours will be 5 bits. Froststorm sighed, handing her the money and trying hard to conceal a smirk as she put on a silly act in an attempt to see through the veil. Oh, I see a great fortune in your future. Invest in carpets or curtains. It's fairly hazy. She then turned to the filly, smiling sweetly. Now then, would you like your fortune read, little one? She asked. Snowstorm giggled and nodded. She knew it was all hogwash, of course, but if Big Brother believed in it, then that's all she needed. The unicorn started her theatrics, humming and waving her hooves in front of her crystal ball. Aha! Yes, I see it. Her face went flat, and she leaned forward, turning over a sign that was hanging on the front of the table. I see my lunch. Goodbye. Hey, wait, you can't just... But the unicorn was gone. Froststorm sighed, walking out of the tent with Snowstorm in tow. Don't worry, sis. She's just weird. All fortune tellers are like that. Besides, I can tell you your fortune if you'd like. He offered to the filly, who seemed a little down. But only unicorns can do that. Don't you know that? You don't need to be a unicorn to be magical, silly. He smiled. Earth ponies can do stuff that'd make any unicorn head for the hills. He laughed for a moment, and then his face grew an expression so serious, it was comical. Yes, I see apples. Froststorm's little sister giggled up at him. But Frosty, we live on an orange farm. Grove, sweetie, he corrected, putting on a mock scholar tone. We live on an orange grove. Fine, Snowstorm groaned, drawing out the word and sticking out her tongue. She hated being corrected. Grove. Yep, that's right. Hey, look, kiddo. He swept her up, letting her scramble onto his back for a better view of the sky. The real show's about to begin. Here comes the first one. A ball of light danced in the hazy mid-morning sky, shooting upwards like a wishing star in reverse. It glowed incredibly, piercing even through the curtain of rain now pummeling the city. It caught Snowstorm's half-opened eye, and for a moment she thought it was simply the beginning of a long-gone fireworks show. Her eyes snapped open, and she flew up into a sitting position, scowling to herself. She had fallen asleep. Unbelievable. She ran a hoof across her cheeks, wondering why her face felt so puffy. Her question was answered as she blinked, feeling the remnants of tears at the corners of her eyes. Of course, it wasn't the first time she'd woken up crying. No time now. Later. Yes, later. When all was said and done, she could bawl her eyes out. But for now, there was bloodshot to deal with. She stood up, pulling the soaked mask over her face and slapping the hat back into place. The dream had been about fireworks, but that had definitely been a flare she saw. A guard's flare. She took off. Some part of her almost hoped they'd already dealt with the massive pony, and some part hoped she'd get 'em all to herself. 7. As Captain Leaf's squadron approached the playground, an eerie silence hung in the air. There was a small colt sitting on a swing by himself, but no sign of Bloodshot. The captain slowly approached the child, nodding to the others to follow. "Sir, it could be a trap," one of the guard warned him. "A child playing here in the rain seems almost too convenient." "Do I not have 9 of you backing me?" Captain Leaf asked sharply, turning his attention back to the colt. "It's a little wet to be playing outside, son." "Might be," the child answered with impertinence. "This place is a little empty for 9 guards, though." "What do you mean, 9 guards?" One of the others chimed in. Oh, I'm sorry. I miscounted. 8, he said, putting on a sharp, humorless grin. "Sir, we're missing 2, another guard began. "Kid," Leaf snarled, deciding politeness was a waste of time. "I'm having a really bad morning. Don't play games with me." "You were the one that put away Big Bro for 3 years, the colt said, smiling darkly. "And now he wants to play. You've already lost 2. Shall we make it 3? Captain Leaf backed away from the colt, yelling into the air. "Bloodshot, I know you're here."
"Do you?"
a voice said from nearby. Bloodshot walked out from behind a wall, his hooves stained with fresh blood. His grin was wide and manic, his eyes wide.
"Gotta say, they're weaker than they used to be. Your standards must be slipping. And to think, you didn't even notice they were gone. Must mean a whole lot to you."
He smiled as the guard all took aim. Silhouettes fluttered in the sky as more and more guards came in response to the flare. They carefully knocked bolts into their crossbows and put Bloodshot in their sights. The stallion merely laughed at the overwhelming numbers, as if he still held the upper hoof. As he reached into his pocket and took out a small vial of silver liquid, the captain knew why immediately.
"You know what this is, don't you, Captain?"
he said, his voice dripping with malevolence.
"Never tried it myself. Wonder what it'd do to a pony that's already invincible."
Before the captain could even order them to fire, he downed the vial in a single gulp. His eyes began to shimmer slightly against the rain. Within seconds, he had rushed towards one of the guard, knocking them down with now blinding speed before moving to the next. To the captain's horror, the bolts were making their mark, and it wasn't slowing him down at all.
"Sorry, Captain, but you're nothing but an appetizer. I'm still waiting for the main course to show up."
The crazed stallion flashed a toothy grin as the captain watched, while Ayla's tragic mistake was repeated in front of his very eyes. "Bloodshot, what are you doing?" A new stallion galloped up, panting and heaving. Snowstorm would have instantly recognized him as the last pony on her list. Roughhouser. "You were supposed to stay indoors," he managed in between deep breaths.
"I got bored. Besides, what's the point of breaking me out if the boss didn't want me to raise hell? And given how weak these pitiful fools are, I'd say I'm doing the city a favor. I wouldn't send these weaklings out to protect a parcel, let alone a city."
"Who are you?" Leaf snapped at the newcomer.
"Nobody important.
Bloodshot cut in before Roughhouser could speak.
And if he's smart, he'll go back to the boss and tell him that I quit. I can take this city by myself, for myself, and the second I'm done with that stupid costumed filly, I'll be coming for him. You got that?"
he said to the shocked stallion. "Not if I have anything to say about it. Not if I have anything to say about it. Not if I have anything to say about it," the captain said, his horn glowing with a protective spell just in case everything went to hell. In situations like this, it always did. "Guards." It was only a moment's hesitation. Rarely had he ever had to call this. "Open fire. Take him down." 8. Snowstorm dashed between rooftops, still trying to shake the lingering images of her dream from her mind. She made a mental note to visit her brother's grave once all this was over. She had a lot she wanted to say, but for now, her goal was the place she had seen the flare fall. Guards flew overhead in a swarm, paying her absolutely no heed. A few stories below, she could hear those who couldn't fly as they bolted through the streets and ducked through alleyways to get to their target. She herself kept a breakneck pace through the rain, seeming to fly through the air as she leapt from one building to another. The guards may get bloodshot, but not before she'd had her fill. Snowstorm peeked over the edge of the last building, reading the situation below. Bloodshot stood at the center of a large semicircle, dozens upon dozens of crossbow bolts trained on him from all angles. She felt uneasy as she looked at him, but tried to ignore it. She placed a hoof up on the lip of the roof, meaning to step up and tackle the massive brute from above. But she hesitated. For once in her life, Snowstorm hesitated. Something rumbled deep in her gut, twisting it. Her heart thumped against her chest. The ground below swirled slightly, and she reeled. She felt the confidence she'd held on to slip away. "What's going on?" she asked herself, not really expecting an answer. Certainly not one that she was about to get. "You're afraid. You're actually scared for once. That's what's going on." But that couldn't possibly be. She had nothing to be afraid of. Not anymore. She made sure of that. And yet the very stallion down there showed you how wrong you are. She scowled, but it was true. For the first time, she didn't feel very much like the mare-do-well. For the first time, she felt like the scared 17-year-old filly that she really was. "Have you so easily forgotten?" A new voice entered her mind, one she hadn't heard in almost a year now. It was the voice of a stallion who seemed not old, but timeless. An old sire who had found her, passed out and without food or water. So he had taken her back to his quaint little village, a collaboration of buildings somewhere in the San Palomino desert that no map would ever see, and most wanderers would think a mirage. For the moment, she stopped seeing Bloodshot. She stopped seeing the guards or the playground or anything else. The eyes she looked with were in her mind, and she saw the sire. "Such an emotional child," he had once said to her. He had taught her many things after she had hounded him to do so. She could vaguely recall a group of bandits and watching how he had taken care of them while barely breaking a sweat. She told herself she needed to learn how to do that. "The heat of battle is a paradox, a culmination of every emotion, but it must be devoid of such," he had said, clouting her on the head for the umpteenth time. Every strike had just made her madder and madder, which for him made the fight easier and easier. "So emotional, it makes you stupid and clumsy. Was I angry at those who raided my village? Was I afraid of their superior numbers and incredible youth? No, your mind must be clear." Clear. Yes, that was the key she had been missing. Her mind hadn't been clear. Quite the opposite, in fact. It had been running away from her. Her mind had become a hurricane, swarming with chaotic thoughts. Had she been so blind? As she looked upon Bloodshot again, she felt that sense of fear linger still. Had he not put her on the defensive once already? Her head still throbbed with the dull ghost of the pain he had inflicted upon her some nights ago. This wasn't some normal pony she was after. He was like a boulder. A boulder. "There's no way I can break that," she had thought, glancing between the large stone and the stern but not unkind face of her teacher. She vaguely recalled having the exact same thought on her first meeting with Bloodshot. He was almost exactly like that boulder. "You look, but you do not see. Stop living in the physical world, filly." The physical world. She blinked, coming to her senses. That giant rock had finally managed to crack beneath her hooves. After years of trying, gallons of blood, and several broken bones, she had been able to make a hairline crack. Bloodshot wasn't a pony. He was that boulder she had come to despise, almost more than the four thugs themselves. The boulder that had beaten her several times over, until she managed to overcome it. She took a deep breath, gathering herself, and forcefully shoving all other thoughts away. It was time to crack that boulder. 9. A purple blur came from the sky like a meteorite, knocking Bloodshot off his hooves. Several guards fired their crossbows in a knee-jerk reaction. Most bolts flew wild, though a couple managed to hit the towering stallion. To Captain Gildedleaf's horror, however, one had also lodged itself shallowly in the mare-do-well's shoulder. "Hold your fire!" he commanded, seeing them wind and knock their empty weapons. We can't risk hitting the mare-do-well again. Bloodshot chuckled, standing up. He felt like he'd just been run over by a freight train, and he relished in it.
About time. I was beginning to think you'd never show up.
He wheezed.
Just how many guards do I have to kill to get a real challenge around here?
Snowstorm stood there, ignoring the flaring white-hot pain in her left shoulder. That leg was already becoming useless, barely able to hold her weight. She held the hoof off the ground, not daring to put any pressure on it. Tears were rolling down her cheeks from the pain, causing her vision to become fuzzy. I'm already at a disadvantage, she thought, taking long breaths and biting the inside of her cheek. She could feel a small line of blood trickle down her leg. It blocked most of the wound off, so there's that.
I want to see that face of yours,
he said, trying to upset her.
See, the thing is, I don't get it. You ain't a guard, and to protect the city for free every night just because. Nobody's that selfless. So what are you after, Philly? What did I do to you? And who did I do it to?
He asked tauntingly, his grin becoming wicked. She paid him no heed. Their fight had now begun, and he had kicked it off by trying to play mind games with her. He'd regret that soon enough. The stallion began to walk circles around the mare, observing his prey for the slightest sign of weakness. After a few seconds, he struck her from behind with such speed that she didn't have time to block. His hoof landed on her rump, sending her staggering forward. He tried for a leg sweep to catch her off balance, but the mare saw the attack coming and responded with a quick blow to his already fractured jaw. He stumbled, muttering some muffled obscenities before readying himself for his next move. On the defensive, exactly where I didn't want to be. This was going to be one interesting fight, with one leg out of commission. He charged again like a rampaging bull. She ducked to the side, trying to raise her injured leg in response, despite the searing pain pulsating in her shoulder. It swung lazily. The entire leg had gone numb. Oh, great. The stallion put himself in a position to grasp the bolt in her shoulder and twist it around. The shaft broke off with a weak snap. The mare screamed, an act that was normally beyond her as a flash of pain shot all the way up her spine. She grimaced, gritting her teeth with such intensity that she was sure they'd crack if she squeezed her jaw any tighter, before swatting his arm away. She backed up, losing her footing on her wobbling legs and falling down. A curtain of white danced at the edge of her eyes, threatening to drag her down into unconsciousness. She clutched her shoulder, bracing herself on the ground as the world spun faster and faster. Out of nowhere, the stallion grabbed her mask and wrenched it from her face, eager to see the mare beneath. After a few seconds, he recognized her face and slowly broke into a wild grin. It was like those stage plays that Gilded Leaf's mother would sometimes take him to. He watched the events unfold, entranced. His own foreleg had grown numb from holding it in the air, keeping the rest of his guards at bay. He couldn't dare let them risk hitting the mare-do-well again. He watched the costume mare fall to the ground in slow motion, watched as she writhed in agony. He even watched as the monster tore her mask off, and she was helpless to stop him, seeing all of it as though they were moving underwater. An odd thought struck him. She's barely older than my own daughter. My own daughter. That could easily have been his daughter, Oriet. In a blink, everything came rushing back to the captain of the guard. "What are you doing?" he bellowed to every guard within earshot. "Help her! Now!" At this, each member of the guard fired at once. In a moment of perfect timing, Snowstorm grabbed the stallion with what little strength she had left and used him as a shield. 6 bolts landed in his back. His screams contained more than just rage now. There was something else there as well, something that gave the mare a renewed sense of hope. Fear. She pulled herself up, willing the sweet embrace of unconsciousness away with everything she had. The guards had given her an opening, and she wasn't about to throw it away. Now she was on the offensive for the first time since the fight had begun. It was a strange feeling, backing this monster into a corner, but she had a bad feeling about it. What was it about cornered animals? Suddenly he jabbed, with Snowstorm taking the hit in full force. Had he not left his hoof there for a fraction of an inch too long, she wouldn't have been able to pull off her next move, taking his extended hoof and breaking it in a single fluid motion with a satisfying snap.
Ugh!
he yelped, the smile on his face contorting into a grimace.
How did you?
Her only response was to twist around and buck him in the chest, balancing on her one good foreleg while her hind legs slammed into him with the strength of a hammer on an anvil. He began to cough blood as he slowly backed away.
Damn it. Did I not take enough? I should be invincible.
Bloodshot said. His next strike parried, leaving him wide open for the first time as he reeled from an uppercut. Snowstorm then started to pummel his chest with a series of blows too quick to be seen, emanating an unintelligible noise from her gullet. Her one good forehoof was a blur, striking him repeatedly.
This can't be happening,
he protested, falling to the ground, trying to catch his breath. As he slowly picked himself back up, he pulled out another vial of the silvery liquid from before.
This ends here,
he proclaimed, downing the vial. In a sudden blur, he grabbed her, lifting her off the ground with his one good hoof. She flailed her legs at him, but it was so much a useless reflex. For a few terrible seconds, she was afraid she would suffocate in his grip, but he fell back, grabbing at his chest where a new bolt had struck. He coughed, wheezed, and then hit the ground, shuddering before lying still. Lieutenant Ayla of the Night Guard dropped her crossbow to the ground. Her body trembled, and she fell onto her back, weak spurts of humorless laughter turning into pitiful sobs as relief swept over her all at once. Her own nightmare, at least, was over. 10. The mare-do-well picked herself up, gasping for air. She looked over at the still form of Bloodshot, but felt none of the joy she'd hoped for. Relief, definitely, but no joy. In fact, she was almost sorry. She limped over to where her mask had been torn off and slid it back over her face. She heard a cry from behind some pieces of playground equipment and saw a pair of guards dragging out a familiar-looking stallion. Perhaps before the fight he would have struggled, kicked, or screamed when the guards caught him, but now his head was held low in defeat. He only raised his gaze to meet hers, the guard stopping as she walked towards him. It was strange. She no longer felt the hate she once did for the stallion, only pity and disgust. It was as though the rage she had held for 5 long years had been consumed in the fires of Bloodshot's madness. A small part of her felt almost grateful for that much, and in a twisted way she would miss having a worthy opponent for once. She merely nodded to the guard, who took Roughhouser away without a word. After a few minutes, Peleus arrived on the scene. "You're alive," he said, rushing forward and hugging her in a move neither seemed to see coming. The crowd seemed amused by this, but he quickly pulled himself away, blushing. He began. "I didn't know whether I'd see you again, that's all." "I thought I had ordered cadets to stay away," Captain Leaf said, strolling up to the pair with a sour expression on his face. "We couldn't take it anymore, Captain. We knew it was against orders, but if he had killed you all, we would have had to have lived with knowing how useless we were." "Sir?" The lieutenant from before cut in, the one in the pocket of the Red Hoof. "I apologize for my actions earlier. If you are willing, I've decided to commit myself full-time to being a guard, as have the others. The Red Hoof has lost his ace, and now the city has one of her own, too." He smiled, turning towards the mare-do-well. "Yes, about that," Captain Leaf mused. He pointed to the costumed mare. "Detain her immediately." The entire crowd gasped and then fell into a stony silence. Only Peleus dare speak. "Sir, after all she's done for the city, done for us, why?" "If I told you it was for her own good, you'd refuse to believe me." "I knew it. And just when I thought you had finally grown a spine. I quit," Peleus said, throwing his armor to the ground in disgust before walking away. Flint limped towards the captain, quietly picking up Peleus' chestplate. "I'll take her, sir," he said after a moment. Gilded Leaf nodded. "Make sure she gets treated, and then prepare her. The mayor wants to see her personally." 11. That night, there was celebrating on the streets. Those that had lost loved ones to Bloodshot visited their graves in solemn remembrance, and others would gossip and chatter about their memories of the monster, happy that the city was a little bit safer than it had been the night before. The Oranges felt a sense of closure to the 5-year injustice that had been thrust upon them, and even Boltbuck felt a weight off his shoulders, knowing he had helped to bring Bloodshot down. But in a single apartment on the far side of town, an elderly mare was not happy at all. She simply held her head in her hooves and wept.